carried. Picture a single ditch, brown, slowed-moving, sandbar choked, that stands between the United States and its status as the world's breadbasket. Lose it, and grain prices spike on 5 continents. Lose it for a season, and food import nations face shortfalls. That ditch is the lower Mississippi River, and it has already come close to failing more than once. The Mississippi River system drains roughly 41% of the contiguous United States. Every bushel of corn that falls off a combine in Iowa, every soybean harvested in Illinois, every ton of winter wheat from Kansas eventually finds a path downhill, by road to a grain elevator, by elevator to a river terminal, by river to the Gulf. About 60% of all U.S. grain exports move by barge down this corridor to the ports clustered between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, according to the USDA. That stretch of river, roughly 200 miles, handles more agricultural tonnage than any comparable stretch of water on Earth. A single loaded grain barge carries about 60,000 bushels of corn. A standard tow pushes 15 at once. Trucks would need 570 to match that load. Rail would need 3 full trains. When the river runs, it moves about 65 million metric tons of agricultural product to Gulf terminals in a typical year, according to the Waterways Council. Here is the problem. The river does not always run. In the fall of 2022, drought across the Ohio Valley and the upper Mississippi caused water levels to collapse. More than 2,000 barges were stranded or delayed. Barge freight rates exploded. At the worst point in late 2022, rates hit 779% of their base tariff. A year later, in the summer and fall of 2023, it happened again. Levels at Memphis and Cairo set records for low water. Rates spiked above 900% of tariff. Over the stretch from July 2022 to January 2023, agricultural exports from Louisiana ports fell by nearly 4%. A loss the LSU Ag Center put at $565 million in a single export corridor in a single season. Then it happened again in 2025, the 4th consecutive year. By late September of that year, southbound grain shipments on the lower river had collapsed from 2.4 million short tons to just 502,000 over the course of a single month. A 79% drop. Barges had to reduce their draft to avoid scraping the riverbed, meaning each trip moved far less grain, while freight rates climbed 50% above long-term averages near St. Louis. Every time the river chokes, grain elevators in Argentina and Brazil capture export contracts the U.S. does not get back. And the Army Corps of Engineers dredges continuously during low water periods, but dredging cannot manufacture water. The forecasts suggest these events will become more frequent, not less. And the infrastructure designed to handle the traffic was never built for the volumes it carries today. 80% of the lock and dam infrastructure on the inland waterways system now exceeds its 50-year design life. Unplanned lock shutdowns nearly tripled between 2010 and 2020. The average delay at a lock has more than doubled. Some upper system locks still run on equipment built in the 1930s. The American Society of Civil Engineers has flagged a $7.5 billion construction backlog for the inland waterways system, with cost overruns on major projects running from $300 million to $800 million each. Congress has authorized portions of the fix funded less, completed very little on schedule, but the deeper fragility is structural, and it comes down to one structure almost nobody has heard of. Roughly 300 miles north of New Orleans, near the small Louisiana town of Simisport, sits a concrete and steel complex called the Old River Control Structure. It is operated by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it does one thing: it prevents the Mississippi River from changing course. Left to its own hydrology, the Mississippi would have abandoned its current path to the Gulf decades ago. The river wants to follow the Atchafalaya, a distributary that offers a shorter, steeper route to the sea. The Atchafalaya already carries about 30% of the Mississippi's total flow. Without the structure carried, that percentage would keep climbing until the Mississippi made a full avulsion, jumping channels entirely, as rivers do over geologic time. If the Mississippi were to jump to the Atchafalaya, Baton Rouge and New Orleans would be left landlocked on a shrinking backwater. The industrial corridor between those cities, which handles over 60% of U.S. grain exports, would no longer have a functioning river. New Orleans would lose its fresh water supply. The Port of New Orleans, which handles more cargo by weight than any other U.S. port, would cease to function as a deep water terminal. The loss to the national economy would be incalculable. In 1973, the structure nearly failed. The flood sent so much water through it that steel pilings were undermined, a wall 67 feet long collapsed, and a whirlpool scoured 90 feet deep. Engineers concluded the structure had come within hours of catastrophic breach. A reinforced auxiliary structure was added afterward. In 2011, the largest flood ever recorded on the lower Mississippi pushed the complex to its limits again, discharging more than 700,000 cubic feet per second into the Atchafalaya system, forcing the Army Corps to open the Morganza spillway for the first time since 1973 to relieve pressure. A study published that year warned that there was a real possibility both the low sill and auxiliary structures could become totally buried with sediment during an extreme event. The original low sill section still bears permanent damage from 1973. The Corps maintains a safe operating limit of 22 feet of differential water pressure. In a major flood, that margin gets tight. One concrete structure, one river's ambition to change course, carried in a 200-mile gauntlet of shallows that dries out in drought years. That is the full geometry of American grain export capacity. The United States feeds roughly 1 billion people through its export flows. When the river chokes, Chicago Board of Trade futures move immediately. Corn and soybean futures spike as traders price in the cost of rerouting through rail or truck. Carried. When freight rates spike, grain elevators in Argentina and Ukraine capture market share the U.S. does not get back. The countries most exposed to a Mississippi failure are the middle-income food importers in North Africa and Southeast Asia that cannot absorb a 20% spike in global grain prices. The Mississippi does not look like a single point of failure. It looks like a river. But strip away the water, and what remains is the thinnest possible thread connecting a continent of farmers to a world that depends on what they grow, held together at its most critical point by a structure that nearly broke in 1973. Pushed to its limits again in 2011, and that still sits at the center of everything, aging quietly, while the droughts come back every year.